All right, so I'm doing a new series here on the channel. It's going to be all about baking. And so for this one, we're going to be playing with the Blender Baker. In the videos to come, we'll be playing around in Substance quite a bit and solving issues when it comes to baking, talking about how to bake different things and things like that. So um, now we're going to get started with a little bit of modeling because when you bake, your model is extremely important. The shading of the model is extremely important. The UV maps are extremely important. A lot of things go into this, and that's usually why you run into errors. So we're just going to start with the default cube. I'm going to add a loop cut, so Control R, pull it forward. It's not meant to be a modeling video, but we got to do a little bit real quick. So Shift A, create a new cube, and we're going to do Bool Tools. So Shift click, Control Shift B. Bool Tools comes with Blender. Go to Edit Preferences, Add-ons, enable Bool Tools. In the options of Bool Tools, set it so that you can see wireframes. And now we can do a brush Boolean difference by hitting Control Shift B. Boom, just like that, right? And so this object here, we can add a bevel modifier to it. Okay. We bevel this thing, we can adjust it like so. We can bump up the number of segments here. You want to use even amounts of segments. Okay, it's extremely important. And also, sometimes having corners like this aren't ideal. Okay, so you might want to manually bevel some things sometimes. And so it's going to be a semi-destructive workflow for the most part. In this case, we're just going to do 6. And we're not doing a high to low poly bake in this video, but we'll talk about that in another one, all right? So first up, these corners are atrocious, right? So the outer emitter for the bevel, change it to arc, okay? It's gonna make it look a lot better. You can also play around with the profile here. 0.7 tends to work out really well for hard surface shapes. And you might want to just tweak that a little bit, but make sure you use it in even numbers, so like 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, whatever. And you'll get something like this going on rather quickly. You can see here the top side still doesn't look quite the part. So we're going to bevel it manually. And when we bevel that manually, we get this really crazy little edge, right? So we turn off loop slide in the bevel modifier, and there we go. That'll correct that real quick. Okay. And so working non-destructively is extremely useful when it comes to baking like high poly to low poly models and things like that. But if you're just doing a model where you're not using a high poly and you're not baking to a low poly, generally speaking, you can work pretty destructively and it's just fine. But with that in mind, we're going to select the main shape here. We're going to do a mirror. In this mirror, we're going to bisect it. Now I'm using an add-on called modifier list, but yours should be very similar. So just axis and then bisect it. You might need to flip it or not. It's going to flip which side it works on. And then once you're done, you can hit, well, we could actually just leave it here for now. All right, so we got kind of something started. Let's go into edit mode real quick. I'm going to manually bevel the bottom here. While I'm manually beveling things, I should also be using even segments, so 12 in this case. Over here, I don't know what I did, but these ones actually, I don't think it really matters too much, but whatever the case. There we go. We got this going on, right? So this shape here as well, we can actually bevel this. And you can see when we bevel this with the modifier on the main shape, it actually kind of pre-bevels it. So working non-destructively, check out the stack modeling video I did. Talks about a lot of this kind of stuff, right? And so this is good. We can actually maybe add UV seams to this and all kinds of other fun stuff, except because we're working non-destructively as much as possible, we can't really add seams where we need them on the model itself. So you do this up to the last possible moment, and then what'll end up happening is that you can actually duplicate the main shape, right-click, convert it to a mesh. It creates a new mesh that's collapsed. There's no modifiers on it. So we can move that to a new collection. I'll just call this one new mesh for now. You can name it whatever you want. And I'm going to turn off all the other collections real quick, clicking them off. So we just have this new shape now. All right. Now, so the reason why I was pointing out that you want to use even numbers is because generally, when you place seams, if you Alt click and then you hold Alt and Shift click, you can select all around your model like this very easily. And that's actually a good place for the seams. However, it's not the only place you can place seams. There's times you're going to actually want to place seams on all kinds of different parts of your model. So it really just depends on the model at the end of the day, on where you're going to end up creating your seams at, all right? So I can do this real quick, Control E, mark seam, okay? We got to go in like this. All right, might want one back here as well. Okay, I'm only going halfway right now because we're going to do another mirror, basically. I want to make sure we got our seams marked out. Okay, so when we do a mirror modifier and we bisect it, we collapse it. So Control A over it, and you should be able to collapse it. And now we don't have to mark the other side too. All right, so anything with symmetry will save you a ton of time when you're working in 3D, right? Right click, shade, auto smooth. Okay, shade auto smooth does this number. I'm going to point something out here real quick. Go to this panel, normals, just max it. Okay, if you still need a sharp edge for whatever reason, there are times you might want to use sharps, but generally speaking, you want to try to avoid them. And what I'm talking about specifically is if you are going to use a sharp. Let's say you have a really tight crease. I'm trying to create one, but we don't have quads. So let me do a KCA real quick. Do a cut across, okay? Let's say this is beveled really, really lightly, all right? And I add a loop cut down the middle. And I hit Alt-S and I drag that in. Okay, let's say we have a really tight crease like this, right? It's going to be almost impossible to not use a sharp there, all right? So if you max this out, everything's going to mostly behave the way you expect it to, but some edges you'll Control E and you can mark sharp still, and it will actually create a nice little seam inside of there. Now we don't have any supporting geo here on the outside of this this little section, so also keep in mind you want to control your shading on your low poly models or any model you're going to bake very deliberately. And so a lot of times that means just adding bevels or chamfers. You can use chamfers, it's okay. Because when you use a weighted normal modifier, what ends up happening is that it's going to actually correct a lot of things here. So let's say I add a weighted normal. You'll see it corrects a lot of things. I can check keep sharp. Now actually, you see how it makes a difference there in the middle? That's one of the few times you'll use keep sharp, guys. And you can max out the weight here as well. Now you'll still get issues with a lot of models, even if you've done all of this perfectly. I'm just going to mention it right now. There's different fixes for different things, and that's why this series is going to exist, because it's you'll run into a number of them, and I want to kind of explain some of those and show you how to solve them anyways. But this is a pretty okay model, I guess, right, for what we're going to be doing. But we need to make sure you did, in fact, UV map it correctly. In this case, this sharp, almost everything you mark sharp, you're going to need to make sure you mark a seam on it too. Can't even see it, but it's in there. There's a seam, okay? So when we go to the UV editor, and press U, unwrap, okay? Something to talk about real quick here with UVs, we just unwrapped it. But if you come over to this little section, there's a display stretch. You might have to mouse wheel over to it, but display stretch, and you can see by angle. All right, this is always going to show you where you're having issues on your model and where you might have messed up on your UV mapping. If you have any stretch at all on the borders or the edges, a lot of times it's going to cause really bad baking issues, potentially on highs to lows the most. But you can see here, this needed to be seamed as well through here, right? And I'm going to do a quick mirror using Mesh Machine, but I would have had to mirror that up to the other side, right? And Mesh Machine is Alt X. You have the option to mirror that way. So now when we unwrap this, let's see if we got any more issues. We do have a number of areas that just simply aren't going to unwrap 100% the way we think they should. All right, so here we go. Ready? You unwrap, bring this open. We're using angle base right now. This is better for organic shapes, curvy shapes. We're doing hard surface, conformal. Okay. Instantly, you see the improvement. Okay, so pay attention to that one. Also, fill holes sometimes causes UV stretching. I don't know why. Turn that off sometimes. Check it, see if it works out. This little menu, the little display stretch thing here, in my opinion, works a lot better than actually using UV checkers for the most part. But sometimes using checkers is still quite useful. But this, you can identify things very fast this way. Okay. Once you have a good shape, good modeling, good seams, all that, for the most part, you can go ahead and start baking on it. So the best place to bake in Blender, believe it or not, is the shading tab. So we go to the shading tab here. This model needs a new material, so we click new. Okay, and then we have this here, principled BSDF. We're all aware of that. All right, now we go to the render tab. The shader is located in, or the baker is located in cycles. Okay, so you have to go there. We're going to minimize all this, and it's under bake. Okay, and so if you don't have cycles set up, by the way, in your preferences, you go to system, pick whatever your GPU uses, and then use that. You're going to have to switch from device CPU to GPU, and use that. It's going to bake a lot faster. Okay, so this is actually a lot easier than you think to use the Blender Baker. So here, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new image texture. So I'm going to press Shift A, create texture, image texture over here, create new. I'm just going to call this bake for now. Okay. It's a 1024. Whatever you want to bake at, double the size of it. So in this case, I want 1024s. I want to type in 2048. So if you want a 2048 or a 2K texture, you want to bake at 4K. If you want 4K, you need to bake at 8K, etc. And that's because Blender doesn't have any real way to anti-alias your renders, so you have to downsample them basically. It causes dithering on it. We'll do that here. And width and height 2048. Okay, done. Click OK. We don't attach it to nothing. It stays right there. And we can actually load it up here. Click that little icon. Bake. There you go. This is what we're going to get, our bake result. All right. Make sure this is selected. We come over here to bake. And now we can actually do things. Like in this case, we could do combined, which combines all this stuff together, which is nice. But we can go over to ambient occlusion, for example. And in here, we can take a look at what's going on. You can do selected to active. That's how you're going to do high polys to low polys at some point. We're not doing that in this one, though. And then you have output, image textures, clear image, right? So it's going to target the image texture over here. But you can actually output this to color attribute or vertex color, basically, right? And then you can clear the image as well if needed. All right, so down here is the margin. This is just how much the bake will start to bleed out in other directions. And you can adjust that in a couple different ways. Adjacent faces or extend. And we're just going to leave it alone for now. Clear image. I want to talk about this real quick. A lot of guys don't realize what this does. Basically, when you hit bake, it's going to clear the image. If there was something already in this image, it clears it out. If you had multiple objects you were baking, and let's say they all shared the same UV space, but like this object is up here in the top left corner, we had another object that was in the bottom right, but it was using the same texture, or it was supposed to use the same texture. If we uncheck clear image, we can bake one, right, and it'll show up there. And then we select the other one and bake it, and it will show up down here. The only problem is that the margin here, all right? If you set this too high and they're too close to each other, you will actually bake one over the other a little bit, okay? So you got to make sure they have plenty of separation, and you change the size here accordingly if you wanted to try to do that. So we're going to bake the AO now. Just make sure the model's selected. The baker, or excuse me, the bake texture is selected. It needs to be highlighted white. And then tap bake, and we should see what happens here in a second. Shouldn't take too long. It just depends on your system specs and performance, but it'll be done pretty quick, generally speaking. All right, so it's done. It only took about maybe 30 seconds or something, but I have a pause button, so I figured I'd use it. Anyways, you can see it's baked out the ambient occlusion here. Up here, all right, image, you can save this out, okay? And save it to, I don't know, desktop or wherever you want. And so this one, I'm just going to name it AO, okay? And save it. Oh, one last thing. We can resize it now and downsample it. So I want you to see this. Right here on the edges, you can see these are actually dithered a little there. That's interesting. But usually they're like this. They're not dithered at all. So if you image, and that happens to every pixel throughout the whole image, not just edges, usually. And so we go to image, resize, and we can knock it down to 1024 here. And personally, I would downsample it in another software, not Blender. Blender does okay, but we can click OK. And you can see, whoop, I messed up the size there, I think. Let's try that again. 1024, 4, okay. So now when we look at that edge, You can see it's just slightly dithered. So every pixel will do that, by the way. I'm not going to do that right now. Just controlled Z back, so it's back at 2K. That's what I want. Okay. So that we can continue baking with that. We're not going to touch it again. Okay. We're going to press Shift A, create texture, image texture. Click open. We saved out that image to desktop. Okay. And so we have AO here. We can plug it into base color right here. Switch over to material preview. And voila. If you take quick note, we have a little bit of ambient occlusion in here now, right now. It's not that great, perhaps, but it's something at least, right? So we can do things like that now, which is great. All right, so what else can we do? That's the question, right? So let's go ahead and let's go to the render preview. Press Shift A. We're going to create a light, point light. And let's just make this light red real quick and crank up the values here. So this object, right now, we have this attached to it. I'm going to detach it. We don't need to use it. All right. We have this object selected. We have this baked image area selected as well. Okay. And we're going to switch this over to diffuse. Okay. So this is going to be how you can bake your colors. Now I want you to take note here that this is a light, right? So this is a direct light, but then all the HDRI stuff may bounce into the back of it or something, and we'll end up with indirect light. I'm not sure if it's actually going to do that because usually you have seen world checked and it looks like this, but we'll see if it actually does do this here real quick. And direct, indirect, and color. And let's go ahead and bake that out. So we got to make sure this image is selected though. And so let's do it. Should just take a second, all right? Or not too long anyways. All right, so it's finished baking and you can see it has in fact updated over here. Surprisingly, it's baked, well, actually it's baked like this. It's got a transparent background, but it did in fact use the scene world instead, right? I was expecting it to kind of do that, but you can see you can bake the lighting into the texture itself. So if you wanted to save this one out, you could save it as like diffuse or something, right? And so that's baked lighting, burnt lighting, whatever you want to call it. All right, let's play with some other things here. So instead of using, you see how this updated to bake for some reason? I'm not real sure why it does that. It's a bug maybe, or something. I don't know. We'll get rid of it for now. Let's go ahead and add a texture, image texture. We're going to open, and I'm going to go to a texture library I have where I have all kinds of stuff in here, and I got some metals. Let's go ahead and load up this metal real quick and toss it into base color here. Okay. So believe it or not, we can actually just bake this this texture here over here as well. So same process, except if you're trying to do PBR workflows, you don't have to use direct or indirect lighting. You might just want the color. So you can do that. And so we can quickly just press bake. And this one should go a lot faster than the other ones. Blender is notorious for being a kind of a slow baker. It does the job, but it's it's just a little bit slower and a little bit more cumbersome to use than the other bakers out there, like Substance Painter or Marmoset Tool Bag. But that's probably the biggest downside. But if you don't have the money for those kinds of programs, then you can make full use out of Blender's Baker, and it does things also that you just simply can't do in Substance or Marmoset, honestly. And it's because you're working inside of your content creation software, so it's actually quite good. And you can see here we've actually got a new diffuse texture. So let's save this one. I'm going to replace, no, we'll do diffuse too. Why not? So we just know we can start creating things here, right? All right, so here's what's fun. We can use multiple UV channels in combination with this to actually achieve some pretty cool things as well. So for example, we know that this is using a UV map, right? Let's go to this object data properties panel here. We can go to UV maps. We can see we're using one right here, okay? So we can create another one if we wanted to, or we don't have to at all. But we're going to go ahead and create another one. So we can say this is UV map 2, right? and we can go ahead and plug in our texture. Oops, sorry. Plug in an input, texture coordinate. Oops, sorry. I always forget. It's just UV map. Okay, use a new UV map. We're going to plug it into a vector mapping. Okay. I don't even know if you need to do that technically. I think you can just plug it straight into there actually. But we're going to use this mapping node in a second, so it's okay. And we're going to select the second UV map. And so what's cool about this is that we know we're going to render to that first one, the original one. This is our new one. And so we can select the new one, go into edit mode, go to the UV editor. And let's say we want to just, I don't know, scale it and rotate everything. Put it over here. Something like that maybe. All right. Go back to layout. Oops, sorry, shading in this case. We'll go to material preview so we're not in cycles the whole time. And so you can see here with our object selected, we can, it's using the new UV map here, right? UV map 2. And that's because this is hooked up. If we switched it, we could use the other one, okay? So we can also bake this out just this simple by selecting this, select this, make sure it's the active one. That's why it's highlighted, and it's the render one. So we can replace this if we wanted to by simply going back to the baker and hitting bake. Just make sure this is selected, okay? So what should happen is it will update in just a moment. And so this is where things are going to get kind of interesting because we can, create materials that are mostly procedural, and then we can start to bake out the PBR kind of assets we need. The only thing is I don't think it doesn't do metallic by default, I don't think, which could be a little bit of a problem, but you can see here is that we got combined, of course, ambient occlusion, shadows, positions, normals, UV. I see UV islands, I think that it does. You can see it's actually updated here. And it's done like so. I think it's using the other UV island though. Is it? No, that's the same one. Do you see? It's just slightly different. Okay. If in that case where you think it's using the wrong UV, you could try duplicating this, and you could try plugging it in, and then forcing it to use the regular UV map here, if you wanted to. Now, the reason I wanted to show you this way is because instead of using UV map, we can also do texture, input, texture coordinate. Instead of using UVs or generated, we use object space. Object space, it's going to shear it apart real quick because we have to adjust the texture. But this texture now, we can take this thing and change it to box. Okay, and box makes it act like something like world space mapping. It's object space mapping, but and we can also adjust the blend amount here. So you'll take note on these like soft edges here. They're kind of crispy and sharp right now. You can actually blend them, cranking that up a little bit, and that usually tends to make it look a little bit nicer. On angled edges, it will also blend. Just so you know, it works better in X, Y, and Z, like straight, forward, backwards, left, right, all that. But you can usually tweak it around and adjust it however you see fit. Okay. On top of that, because we're using object space, we can come in here and we can play with the scale values, which is kind of fun. And so we can tweak that like so, maybe bump that up or down. If we add an empty, Shift A, create empty plane axis, we can go back to our material here, our object. We can reference the empty here, and we can actually move the empty up and down and do this number as well. So there's a little bit of options here that you can play with anyways. It's quite fun. You may get a little bit of shearing in it, but if so, just turn your blends down. Usually that helps out quite a bit. Okay. Now, because we did all that and we're still set up the way we're set up, if we wanted to bake this to this image here, we can do that. Once again, we just click bake. With the image selected, click bake, and it will transfer over there, all right? All right, so what we're gonna end up doing here is we're gonna bake that out and save it. But what I wanna do most is I want to go ahead and start getting ready for the next step. We're going to create a bump, a vector bump. Okay, just that. And we're not going to attach it to nothing yet. I think it's getting finicky because I was adding things, but um, let's see, what else do we need? We're going to need probably, yeah, you see it updated. It's awesome, right? So we can save that real quick. This is going to be our fourth one, I guess. We've done 4 diffuse textures. All right. Now this is where the fun begins. We're going to plug bump into normal. Kind of hard to see, but it basically down here. Bump normal into normal, right? And so before we get there, though, I want to control the black and white values of this a little bit more. So we're going to run it through color, hue, saturation, value. In the saturation, I'm going to kill it off so it's just black and white. And once it's black and white, we can run it through brightness and contrast if we wanted to, or we can use a vector, or excuse me, a converter color ramp. Color ramps are extremely important because it allows you to increase the contrast by doing something like that or blowing out the values. But you can also click on each individual handle and you can adjust it so that you can tweak the values here quite a bit as well. Okay. So this is part of the texturing process in Blender that is actually really good. It's very kind of similar to Substance Designer in a way, but um, what we can do is like add things to this, like texture, noise texture, right? This noise texture, we can play with it real quick by just running it to base color. And you'll see it loads up like so. This one happens to be in color, but we're going to do this number, change the roughness values, and do all that fun stuff. We can add detail, less detail. Doesn't really matter. Let's do more detail. I mean, you'll tweak. I don't know what numbers I'm going to end up using whenever I start something, right? So like, you play around with them and you just kind of figure out the cause and effect of the node itself, and then after you know that, you can just play with it like and do whatever you want basically. So, but basically, we're going to go with this. We're going to use the factor, which should, in theory, be black and white. Yep. So we can do a color mix shader, mix RGB. Okay. I want this one on top and that other one on the bottom, so we can blend between them, and we can do something like a multiply. You'll see we can actually add it to that a little bit. Okay. We might need to adjust this more, but it might be something like brightness and contrast. And so we're going to bring that normal back over here. Go full screen for a second. We're going to plug this into here. All right. Oh, sorry. Height, not normal. And that should work out just fine. I'm going to press Shift A, create a texture, image texture. Open. We're going to open up that last diffuse we baked out. Okay. Plug it into base color. Okay. And this was using object space mapping. All right. And I think we're going to switch that so that we're not using object space mapping, that we might be using UV, but in this case, let's get rid of that. We're going to be using UV mapping. Actually, no. We want this one to use UV. So we'll add a UV map. We want it to use the original. This one can continue to use that for now because they should line up with each other. But basically, you can set up your material however you want. So you can see we have some bump mapping going on now, right? Which is quite cool that you can just go through and do this real quick. Kind of hard to see the surface details here, but it's pretty rough. And so we can go down to the bump node. We can change the strength and tweak these settings a little bit. See if we end up with something a little bit nicer. These over here, we can also change the blend factors and things like that as well. Change the blend modes here. You can actually control and then middle mouse wheel kind of through these and see if you get different results and see what you end up with. But a lot of times it's better to actually just plug it into base color and just see your results real quick. Now there's add-ons that let you see previews of each node as well, so you might want to check into that. But Yeah, so there we go. We have started generating more or less a kind of a bump map here, right? This noise texture. I'm going to actually go into, I'm going to use a color ramp here. I just want to bring up, I think, I'm going to bring that up a little bit, I think. Bring it down, actually. I don't mind the noise. I think it's just too strong when it's full maxed. So I'm trying to tweak it with this instead of using the multiply there. Let's see, we can get some nice results going. Fairly well anyways, not too bad. All right, and so we can keep running with this idea and creating a bunch of other things as well, such as like roughness, right? We could do that. Matter of fact, if you take this and you run it through an invert, color invert, right? Plug it into the roughness. A lot of times it's pretty close to what you need. You might have to create a color ramp and further refine it though to get a nice roughness the way you want. So you might like say bring in this handle, or maybe leave that one out actually. You can make things glossier or not glossier or whatever. But you can do things like this and then say maybe instead of being pure white, we want it like a mid gray almost. Instead of this being pure black, grab it and we can make it like a less. So we can influence the surface there super fast without doing too much manual work anyways. All right. And this texture here does not line up on our UV or at all. So in theory, this was our original texture here. We can actually remove that and we can plug this one into color over here. And it should work out a little bit better because it will capture that seam now, hopefully. And so you might just want to pull these back out over here because that's like our core base unit, right? That's what we started with. Let's see what we can't get going here. I think the multiply factor might actually be good now. Yeah. So there we go. We got that going on. Perfect? No, but it's fun. And you can get really involved with this kind of thing because right now we have just the material or the texture we had baked out. If we create a new texture here, image texture, click open desktop. Oops, sorry, not desktop. We're going to go to my metal folder and use a rust texture. Okay. We can plug, well, we don't have to adjust this at all right now for the most part, except I do want to create input, texture coordinate, mapping, converter, vector, mapping. I do want to do a box on this one, okay? So you can do this, where we do object mapping again, on top of your UVs, which is pretty cool when you think about it. But basically, we'll hook this up here. So now we can do, this is a lot about materials, right? But the idea here with the materials is that you can use the bakes to actually create things to help you create things. And in this case, I don't think it's absolutely necessary, but you can do it. So blend right here. I'll turn the blend up a little bit. And this was using object point, okay. All right, so see how it's blending. I guess we're gonna get pretty high on that one. Wasn't expecting that, but we'll do like a 0.5, 0.5, 0.5. Tab key to go through those real quick, right? Wasn't expecting this to behave in this manner necessarily. Okay, so it's good enough, I think, for now. But so this is where it gets interesting, right? We're gonna mix colors. And this one I want run into the top. Okay, so it's gonna blend this one in with this one. And so This is where we add another texture, image texture, click OK. We're going to open desktop. Here's our AO, right? So our AO, so we can just temporarily see it real quick. We're going to move it around. Plug it into base color like we did before, so we can kind of see it, right? Here's where it gets fun. Now you can see the normal map details as well. Kind of fun. Anyway, so AO, we need color, brightness, contrast. And we can go ahead and tweak the brightness and contrast of this AO. Generally, you want it pure white for the most part, but certain areas you might want darker. Like, let's say we wanted this area to be like more rusted, right? Now we can create something like a different kind of setup here. Like, say we wanted to add um, texture. Let's try Voronoi. Voronoi texture. We're going to do a color mix RGB. We're going to add that Voronoi into it. And we're going to do a multiply. See what we can't get going on here. Okay. Might have to change that up, but right now it's looking like we can get this like really nice grainy kind of stuff going on, right? It's like noise, but it's just thicker. And we tweak the values here. So maybe instead of multiply, we try something different. I only want it to take effect in the ambient occlusion areas, like on the edges of it for the most part. So I'm gonna hold control and mouse wheel through this and just see what we kind of end up with. Like that right there, actually. It's not too bad. You can see the AO didn't quite bake out exactly how we wanted, so we might have to tweak some values and play with the bakes a little bit. But for the most part, that's pretty much what I wanted. So that's good. We're gonna use this as a mask. We're gonna put it up here. So that AO mixed up now, right? Into the base color there. Okay, so this AO that we just set up is acting like the mask that's blending these two together. And usually it's best to keep things not crossed over each other and just organize how you see fit. But doing things like that, obviously, would be better. And control spacebar real quick. So we're going to blend through this. We're going to try and multiply first, but we're going to mouse wheel through it, actually. You can see some of it might work out. Some of it looks pretty rough. We're going to have to figure out what's going to work and what's not going to work here. So, trying to make it look like it's just rusting in the area that has ambient occlusion, basically. I forgot which one it is. It's like I think it's like difference or subtract or something. I forgot what it was. Click through it real quick. Or it might be like overlay or soft light, something like that. Hopefully we can go through these a little bit faster. See, that one was close, but wasn't quite right. Okay, I think that's it. But the problem is right now is it's inverted. So we got to add an invert real quick. Yep. It's kind of hard to see it. I forgot to do it, but yeah, you got to add an invert sometimes. You can see we can kind of go back and forth with that. We needed to, but here we go. And a little bit of a nice touch, just add a converter and do a color ramp. And now you have a little bit more control over what's going on here, like this, right? And you can also grab it and maybe lighten it even, or darken it, right? In this case. Probably should do this before the invert, but maybe just lighten it a little bit. All right. Okay, and so here's the deal. You can bake out other things in here if you really need to or want to. Some of them get a little bit confusing though, and they're not so simple and straightforward on like where things exist. Some of them don't even really exist at all. If they do, they're not like apparent. So here's the thing: is that you might want to consider If you don't have money right now, okay, you don't have the money for it, get the Text Tools add-on. It has its own little baker in here. And I think some of this uses Eevee actually, not just cycles, but um, I don't know how exactly these add-ons do that, but they do. And so you can create all kinds of different bakes for different things. So like you can do bevel masks, cavities. You can bake out pretty much little components you need that will help you do more interesting, cool stuff that like this, anyways, right? And for whatever reason, that is shearing really hard. Um, so check out the Text Tools add-on if you get a chance. It's all in here. We're not going to go over that in this video. I might make another video about it later on, or I might use it in some other videos. And but overall, yeah, that's pretty much baking in a nutshell. Like you can do all kinds of stuff, but the most interesting thing I think about all of this is that when you're done doing this, just select this, right? Go back to diffuse. It's already set up, so you could just do the bake again, and it will create you another one here with the additional rust and everything else. So as you make your materials, even if they're procedural and they're using Blender's built-in things, you can always extract them back out for PBR material to create PBR materials if you wanted to. But I don't know about metallic, to be honest. I don't know with the default baker. I'm not sure exactly how you set that up entirely. I'm pretty sure you could. There's also paid add-ons. There's one that I'm going to make a video on later. It's called Simple Bake. It's really powerful. It's really good for atlasing. It's really good for doing PBR materials. And so I'll do videos on that for the rest of the series. We might do some add-ons, Simple Bake, Text Tools. We're going to take a look at a bunch of geometry situations probably, where there's just like what looks like perfect geo still doesn't work, but there's a reason for it. So we'll get into shading and normals and how to approach different types of objects and things like that. So you can see it went ahead and updated, and now it has the rust in it as well. So let's, this is bothering me. So last thing we're going to do, oh, you know what? I don't think we can do nothing to it because that's in the diffuse, isn't it? Or in the normal. Yeah. So that might be a little bit of an extreme case there, huh? That normal being like that. Yeah. So that's bothering me. That's because of when I placed it. You remember I scaled it. So when I scaled it, I guess I got it really wrong, and that's what happened. Yeah. Look. See. So be careful scaling. Use a uniform scale. Basically, make sure all your values match up. They're all ones, ones, or 0.5s, 0.5, 0.5, right? It's going to give you a better result. Anyways, that's it for this video, guys. I hope you really enjoyed checking this one out. We'll be doing more of these here in the future, but for now, this is going to be it. All right. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked it, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and I'll check you out next time. All right. Take care.